Welcome to Leading for Life Stories, Season 3. I'm Bob Judson, I'm the host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Regardless of whether you're a seasoned listener who's been with me since the beginning, or whether you've just dropped in for the occasional episode, I really hope you enjoy the mix of content that I provide, the personal stories, the thematic episodes, and the guests that I have on the show. And I hope you find it all interesting and at least some of it useful. And without further ado, let's go. Welcome back, everybody. My guest this week is Hetti Barkworth-Nanton. I've done some powerful podcasts in the time that I've been doing this with some amazing guests who spoke very passionately about a range of issues. But I have to say this one is right up there at the very top of that list, I think. Hetti's an amazing person. She talks a lot about what she's done. I won't go into too much detail here, but she's one of these people with a multifaceted career that you just wonder how on earth she makes the time. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Ploughshare. She's the Chair of Refuge UK. And she's the co-founder and the patron of the Joanna Simpson Foundation. And actually, we talk a lot about that particular aspect of her life because it's been a massive part of it in terms of a campaign to keep the killer of Joanna Simpson in prison and get the law changed ultimately to try and work to make sure that more broadly women are safe from this kind of perpetrator. She's the winner of a Pride of Britain Award in 2024 as a result of all that campaigning work, and it's just an amazing and pretty emotional story. So I really hope you enjoy it. I think there's a load of fascinating insights along the way about Hetti's own progression, her own vulnerabilities, some of the things she's experienced that are really, really valuable and great insights. And I'm very grateful to her for being so open on the show because I think it's worth a listen by any measure, and I thoroughly hope you enjoy it. Off we go. Hetti, fabulous to have you on the podcast. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining. I think it's going to be a great conversation. I'm really looking forward to it.
No, thank you. Looking forward to it too. And thank you for having me.
Oh, no, not at all. No, thank you for coming on. I mean, you're a very busy person. I know that. And there's an awful lot of great stuff to cover in this. I mean, you have had an incredibly varied career. You've been across a whole range of different industries. You're clearly leveraging that experience in what you do now with Ploughshare. But I'm very conscious as well, that's only part of what you do. You do the Chair of Refuge. You're obviously involved with the Joanna Simpson Foundation. We're going to talk about both of those. And it's an extremely impressive portfolio of things, if you like. But just to get us started, can you put a bit of flesh on those bones and tell us about your journey?
My journey? Well, my journey started the same way everyone else's journey started typically, which is usually in a hospital wing or in a bedroom when I came onto the world. And I guess one of the things that might be a common theme coming through our conversation, Bob, is, one of the things I really fiercely believe is that at the end of the day, no matter what we all end up doing, no matter what our life experience is, we are all just simply human. And I'm just another one of those humans on this lovely planet. So I'd start there, really. I won't talk about my childhood per se, certainly at the moment, but in terms of my career. So I've had 30 years experience in the commercial sector. I started out at British Airways as a graduate, which was, by the way, PS, anyone listening who's young and wondering what to do with their career, although it might be different now, just the best graduate job you could ever do because I got lots of free flights. And what's not to love about that? So I started at BA as a finance graduate. I did a business studies degree and I loved marketing and all that kind of lovely fun stuff. But I figured out that 90% of the people on said business studies degree were also doing marketing. And I did O-level maths. I wasn't that great, but I kind of could do numbers. And I thought, actually, I'm going to major in accounting because if I can major in accounting, not many people know how to do that. And if I know how to do that, I can then switch to marketing because that's not that complicated. So that was my thinking. I joined as a finance graduate at BA so I could finish my qualification, but I never had a long-term desire to be a finance person and ultimately to be a CFO. But going into British Airways, I started in internal audit. And long story short, I spent 5 years as a financial controller, loads of experience. fun experience running the finances for Worldwide Catering, which got me to go on some really, really cool catering courses, nonetheless, including Anton Mosselman for a week, which was quite cool. And then financial controller for marketing, within which I did all of the finances for the new Tailfins refresh back in the mid-90s that some people might remember. There was an unmitigated disaster.
Is that the famous Maggie Thatcher moment with her handkerchief over the tailfin? I remember
Maggie
it well.
Thatcher.
Yeah.
It was actually, in hindsight, it was genius. It was absolutely genius. They were trying to switch BA from being very corporate and male to being much softer and much more international and critically much more female. But I think they were about 10 years before their time. But anyway, that was what it was. I also did all of the finances for the London Eye, which again is another really interesting example of actually risk taking by the then Bob Ayling, because we looked at the finances and I went back to Bob and said, this is never going to work out. There is no way that a whole bunch of people are going to be constantly queuing to go on this London Eye thing. It's south of the river. You only go south of the river if you yearn after Oliver Twist and want to be murdered. At the time, it wasn't the heaving cultural centre that it is now. But he had a vision and, it paid off, and the rest is kind of history.
Well, the amazing thing about the London Eye is it was supposed to be a 1 year thing, wasn't it? I remember well when it was being put up.
5 years.
Was it 5 years?
Okay, 5 years.
But
yeah.
I mean, it was going to go up, and of course, it's now an indispensable part of the London skyline. I mean, it's unimaginable that it would disappear.
I know, and we should all thank Bob Ayling for that. Actually, that I believe that is his legacy. And if you were to look at the holistic point of view in terms of the tourism that it's brought in and the generation of growth and economic growth around that area, the London Eye is at the heart of that. I then got board of finance, and I was working as the financial controller for marketing on a big program to put the very first seatback video on the aircraft. Again, we're talking mid-90s, and it was failing big time. And they needed someone to come in and run it that could work right across the organisation and get the right decisions made, get the damn thing on the aircraft, because they were starting to hemorrhage customers to Virgin transatlantically. And they decided I was the one for the job. And I guess it's the first time I was ever sort of put into a job deliberately, because there was a knowledge that I knew how to engage with people. I knew how to join dots, and I knew how to get things done, basically as simple as that. And I then spent 5 years delivering that, and then driving the e-business agenda at BA. So basically digital transformation in all but name, because we didn't call it digital transformation at the time. So that was 10 years at BA. Then I sort of took that experience and went to other organisations and other industries. So I did 5 years at Centrica, which included the full outsourcing of HR. Then I started my foray in the telco industry. So I went to Openreach, inspired to go to Openreach by the then CEO, Steve Robertson, who I think was pretty inspiring because he really believed in what Openreach were doing, and he's very much a people person. So I went and joined Openreach and became the commercial director for Openreach. So it's very early days in Openreach's gestation, and they needed to really create a very, very different proposition in the marketplace in terms of how they work with communication providers and how they look at their pricing and all that good stuff, so that it's much more commercially orientated. I had lots of fun with that, delivered a real step change in the kind of way in which Openreach was engaging with its customers, which it now continues to build. And I then left BT after 5 years, having really established all of that, and I went to Vodafone. Now, the more astute amongst you might have worked out that British Airways, Centrica, which is basically British Gas, and BT are all big ex-public sector companies. So they had that really interesting cultural mix of wanting to be young and thrusting and commercially orientated and private sector, but with the legacy dragging it back all the time in terms of culture around the public sector. I'll come back to that. I then went to Vodafone, but at Vodafone, I was integrating the ex-Cable and Wireless estate into Vodafone. So driving that across the whole of the largely enterprise business in Vodafone, and drove off the back of that the closure of all but one network, all but one legacy network. So, the list is long, and of course now I can't think of any of them. But any of you that have worked in and around the cable and wireless world will know all of these ex networks that were all acquired by cable and wireless. They went on their happy way. So we closed all of those networks, delivered a 10-point improvement in EBITDA for the UK enterprise business. And once we'd done that, that kind of became the right time for me to leave. And then I thought, well, where do we go from here? I kind of had my fill of large corporates by then. I felt like I'd done my penance. It's tough operating in large corporates, but I think it's particularly tough doing the kind of stuff that I was doing, because for all of those years, I was very much cutting against the grain of the organization, very much driving transformational change. And, that's a tough place to be in those businesses. In fact, I remember my then boss at Vodafone, a guy called Phil Mottram, who I'd actually worked with at BT as well, who said, I don't understand you, because most people would really not enjoy your job, and yet you seem to enjoy it. And what I enjoy is number one, doing the right thing. Number two, driving real change. And number three, I love the complexity, but also the result of working with different stakeholders, different people, and thinking about how do you start to get the shift that you need. So yeah, I used to love it, but it wasn't easy. The power in these big corporates sits where the budget sits. That's the bottom line. And usually when you're driving these big transformational programs, you might have programmatic budget, but you don't have functional budget. And so you're trying to very much get people to shift their priorities against budgets and targets which don't align. So I really had enough. I'd also sort of had enough with seeing some of the worst of cultures. So, there's some brilliant cultures within the private sector, and I saw some brilliant cultures, but there are also some not so brilliant cultures. And particularly, what is my passion is diversity and inclusion, and true and genuine and authentic inclusion. That means that you don't just say that people can come to work and be their very best, but you actually mean it. And that includes that when people's lives are not actually perfect, because frankly, no one's life is perfect. But when, people have tough times in their lives, and when organizations can't support them and support them really genuinely through those tough times, I think all of the rhetoric about values and everything else, frankly, goes out the window. And that was something that I really didn't appreciate, and wanted to be part of something that wouldn't feel like that. So then I ended up at Ploughshare. I was phoned up by a consultant, a headhunter, who said, I've got this great opportunity. I was like, what is it? So he described it. And for those that don't know, basically at Ploughshare, we are fully owned by the MOD, but we are a separate limited company with our own independent board. And we have unique access to all of the intellectual property coming out of, or that's owned by the MOD, and we commercialize it. So we look to take that often very nascent invention, which can be a plethora of things. It could be software, it could be hardware, it could be even just knowledge. And we look to get it out into the market and scaling and ultimately delivering against the UK PLC growth agenda. And we do that either by licensing it to existing companies, or we set up our own companies. We set up spin-out companies. Now, number one, it was not described as succinctly as that when I was told about the job. And number two, I did not have a Scooby-Doo really what it was about. But what, after a couple of days, intrigued me was that this was the opportunity to be a CEO, which I'd not done before. And remember that desire to want to really work in an environment that sung to my values. And here was an opportunity to create that, right? But also, it's a small business. It's all about innovation. And I'm a transformation junkie. So actually, there's a very fine line between transformation and innovation. But also, it needs somebody who's very good at working across ecosystems, very good at working with the public sector, ergo, typically the MOD. And whilst I'd never worked with the MOD, and someone could have warned me more before I took the job, I did have that experience of working in large, complex businesses, and many of them ex-public sector. So I thought, I can actually do this. I don't quite know what it is, and I don't quite know what I'm going to do, but intrinsically I knew I could do it. So yeah, I landed at Ploughshare on the 1st of April 2020. right in the middle of lockdown. I thought there was about 45 people in the business because that's what the job description said. Actually, there were only 12. But I started at 9 o'clock in the morning on the 1st of April and just looked at this 12 faces looking at me. About 12 angry men. I tell you, it was like kind of, when we were right in the middle of lockdown, everyone was really nervous about who I might be. It's not a great way to meet your team, particularly when you're not used to working remotely in that way. And I thought, oh, blimey, no one was smiling. It was really hard to get anyone to engage. But 5 years later, we're massively transformed. We are kind of really knocking it out of the park in terms of our results. And we are just about to pivot into an even more exciting space, which we may touch on a bit later. But yeah, we are really going some. And honestly, you can see the effects of my blend of skills coming through in where we've taken the business. And most importantly, I am beyond proud of the culture in the business. It's massively diverse, particularly women. We've got about 60% of our commercial team are female. We had no females in our commercial team when I joined. We've got a lot of young women who are incredibly talented, who are being supported through, having their first children and their second children, but also being encouraged and nurtured and really given the opportunity to shine in their career. And that's probably the thing I'm most proud of. That's my corporate career.
Yeah, nice. Well, congratulations. I mean, in terms of, you started with 14 then, how many have you grown to now as Ploughshare?
So we're now about 30, but I was going to say, don't quote me, but this is a podcast and I'm going to be quoted. But my ambition is, I think we will be 50 by the end of next year if I have my way, but let's wait and see.
Okay. Yeah, nice. The thing that amazes me when you're describing all of that, which is, as I said at the beginning, an incredibly varied career with lots of different facets to it. I can absolutely see how you build, on and on and on from the different things and take all that, knowledge from the BA world on into all the other things you did subsequently. But alongside that, you do what you do with Refuge, and that can't be a kind of tiny part of your life either. I mean, that's got to be a pretty big chunk as well, right? So just talk about that a little bit before we move into something else.
Yeah, sure. So actually, the first thing I did in the first world of charity. So I do a lot of work actually with the Windsor Leadership. And when I was at Windsor Leadership, first went on the programme back in 2007, the thing that I came away from was believing suddenly that little light has been sparked that says, I want to do more in society than I'm currently doing. And working in the corporates, lining people's pockets, yada, yada, isn't really kind of, creating that real passion that I know I've got deep down. So I did actually start off by being a trustee on a charity board called Leap Confronting Conflict. That's Leap Confronting Conflict. If no one's heard of them, do look them up because they do absolutely brilliant work across the UK, working with young kids who are sort of involved in gangs or conflict as teenagers and giving them a different path. And it helps them, gives them conflict resolution skills to really become leaders in their own right and in their own society. So they're a great charity. I then, in 2014, started up a charity called the Joanna Simpson Foundation, which was, I'm sure we'll come to this, but which was kind of 4 years after my close friend Joanna Simpson was killed by her estranged husband. We set up the charity very much focused on supporting children who are affected by domestic abuse and homicide, because we could see that was a big gap, but also Jo's big love was her children and the nurturing of children. So we set that up. And then in 2020 again, just during that time, we started to do campaigning as well, myself and Jo's incredible mother, Diana Parks. And as part of that, we met the then Duchess of Cornwall, Miller, and was really hearing Jo's story. And I think particularly meeting Jo's mum, who's similar ages as the Duchess, that really inspired the Duchess of Cornwall to lean forward and really lean into the whole agenda around domestic abuse and raising awareness, which to this day we're super proud of. But then in 2020, I happened to sit next to a guy at a Windsor event, actually. And I said, oh, what are you doing? And he said, and I explained to him what I'm doing. And he's a headhunter. And he said, oh, that's funny. He said, we've got a job going at the moment, which is the chair of Refuge. I went, oh, that's quite interesting. Now, Refuge had a bit of a reputation in the sector at the time as being quite a formidable place. They had a very formidable leader in the shape of Sandra Hawley, and they weren't necessarily as collaborative as they probably needed to be. And I thought, ooh, that could be a really lovely blend of my change skills, my leadership skills, but also my passion. So I decided to apply. And I share that little story. I mean, hopefully these little stories are quite helpful, but there's a lot about life that's about serendipity, isn't it? And just sort of what happens to happen and who you happen to talk to. You just don't know where conversations are going to take you. I applied. It was around the same time that I was applying for the Ploughshare job. And I got the job. There was a lot of resistance within the organisation for me to get the job. And I don't know why that was. At its heart, I think it was because I'm a change agent, and maybe there was some resistance to change. But also at a superficial level, I've been doing some work with Safe Lives, which is another domestic abuse charity. And there was a sort of a very fierce belief that Safe Lives philosophies and beliefs were not consistent with Refuge, and therefore, how could I possibly be the chair of Refuge if I'd been doing some work with Safe Lives? But I was offered the job and I took it, and I started actually at the beginning of June. And the funny little story that joins up Ploughshare and Refuge is that, I don't know, before the beginning of June and after the 1st of April, there was an article in the Saturday Telegraph which had a headline something of the order of "Arms Dealing Anti-Feminist Takes Over at Refuge." It was my first foray into the world of media. And thankfully, I had a PR person on the board who said, you must not react. You must not say anything. It will disappear before you know it. But yeah, that was, I laugh about it now. And to be honest with you, at the time, I did think it was quite funny. But there was a lot of pressure for me to stand down, but I didn't. And I've been there for 5 years now.
Yeah, you've got to love the headline writers for some of these things. I was amused just yesterday, I think, on the back of Trump and Zelensky meeting in the White House. That I think was one of the tabloids that was the headline was "Suited, Not Booted." They really thought about that one, didn't they? That, it's quite clever, really. That and as you say, tomorrow's chip paper a lot of the time with some of these things, but sadly not all the time. I mean, I think I do feel sorry for people, particularly the ones that are very much in the public eye. I did a podcast recently with Tom Tugendhat, and we were talking about exactly this, that I think one of the pressures on MPs is your private life becomes completely public. He was kind of okay with it. He said, well, it goes with the job, and you know that before you take it on and everything else. But I do think that must be very difficult to deal with. And if it's constantly in your face, that's they kind of own you and making up stuff that is extremely distressing for personally and for your family. We'll definitely come back to the Joanna Simpson thing. The 100% will come back to that.
And by the way, I think MPs get a bad press, right? I think the job that they do and the way in which that job exposes them as people and their families and their life, is extraordinary. And you can have a whole debate about whether they get paid enough. But I think anyone that makes the decision to become an MP and really throw their heart and soul into that needs to be applauded. No,
I totally agree with you. And in fact, we talked about pay as well for exactly that reason. And I think it is a difficult area for them, isn't it? But anyway, back to you. Mm-hmm. I tend to, having set that out, and it's a fascinating life story. I mean, you must be one of these kind of people with a Harry Potter time turner, I think, that makes more time in the day than there actually is to do all of that. Because it is an incredible package of stuff that you're involved with. But early motivations that took you in that first, those first steps into BA and so on. I mean, you touched on a little bit, but when you dive back a little bit further into your life, what was it that kind of set you on that path?
That's such a good question, and I really strongly believe that if you want to be a truly authentic leader, then it starts with you and understanding you and what drives you and what motivates you. So I was brought up in rural Lincolnshire, number 3 of 4 girls. And on face value, in many respects, an idyllic life. My parents were both, my father had been an army officer, but was by then the secretary for the National Farmers Union. And my mother was a stay-at-home mum. They were both sort of offspring of a line. My mother was an offspring of a line of Navy officers. My father was an offspring of a line of army officers. So that was the sort of context. We all went to comprehensive school. I think actually my theory is that we went to comprehensive school because all of our cousins went to private school. partly because you don't get earn much money when you're a NFU secretary. Secondly, because all the previous army officers spent all the money. And thirdly, because we were girls. And I'm absolutely convinced that had one of us been a boy, that boy would have gone to private school. Funny.
Yeah, maybe in that generational thing at that time frame, but I can potentially say that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. But actually it was a gift. It was a massive gift. And I loved my time at school, the local primary school, where, I don't have any memory of learning anything. I have memories of the maypole dancing and stuff like that, right? I was lucky enough to have a pony when I was about 10, and then a horse. I played the flute, all sorts of lovely stuff. When I was 14, I would say in that time, there was probably a bit of a dynamic in the family between the girls about just wanting to be the apple of our father's eye. And definitely competition between us around wanting to be that apple in our father's eye. But when I was 14, my eldest sister was 18, my youngest sister was 11. My father was diagnosed with lung cancer. And actually, he died within 2 months of being diagnosed.
Oh, my goodness. I'm sorry.
It was very quick. But he did smoke about 60 cigarettes a day. So, I mean, we can sort of, it sort of was almost going to inevitably.
That's a tough age to lose your dad at, though. For all of you, actually, if you had that age span, 11 to 18, that's a very tough time. I lost my father when I was 3, and I mean, wow. That's bad, but I don't really have any memory of him. And obviously, when you're a 14-year-old, it's very different.
Yeah. Yes, I think it is. What you will appreciate, though, is the response to death as a child is very different to the response as an adult, because I think as a child, you have no concept of forever. You have no concept of anything really in regards to death. And therefore, I think your response is very different to the response as an adult. And we'll come back to that. Where the system went wrong, where my mother went wrong, where my father went wrong, but I understand it because it was of the time, is that all 4 of us were led to believe he was going to be fine. The conversation was very much one of, oh, well, he's young, he's fit, he'll be fine. He was never going to be fine. Like he was riddled with lung cancer across both lungs, but we weren't told that. And so literally, we went to school one morning, and when we got back, he wasn't there. He was in hospital and he died the following morning. So the trauma associated with him dying was unnecessarily significant, I would say. And that's when my childhood finished, without a shadow of a doubt. And once I got over the initial shock, obviously, and in those days, they used to bury people really quickly. Like, I think he was buried about 3 days after he died. I mean, that just does not happen these days.
No, not at all.
So you're just swept along in this whole thing. And I can remember at the funeral, at the wake, I was smiling. Remember, I always want to be the apple in everybody's eyes. I think I was smiling at one point at the funeral and said, oh, look, you got a lovely smile. It's so lovely to see you smiling. Obviously, people at funerals, when they know children are there, are very relieved when they see a child smiling because they're terrified of them. And I took that message and thought, okay, well, I've got to keep smiling then. And I think it was that moment on, 2 things happened. One is I decided, right, I can't look back because I just can't look back. I've got to look forward. So I'm going to focus on looking forward, and I'm going to focus on smiling. And that was the flip that went on in my brain, and that's what I did. And however, I guess, so that was definitely a life-defining moment in my life. And what they do say is that actually if you lose, again, you might understand this, Bob, but if you lose a parent as a child, then you are significantly more likely to, and it's called adverse childhood experience, isn't it? But you're much more significantly likely to suffer from mental health issues, from lower employment, from all sorts of manifestations that comes from adverse childhood experiences, of which losing a parent is one. But I looked forward. I was hopeless at school. So I was always, the rhetoric in our household, even when Dad was still alive, was that I was the stupid one. So I was number 3. In particular, my sister, that was just older than me, was super bright and super brilliant at everything. I remember in primary school being told by my primary school teacher, oh, well, getting my mental arithmetic wrong, and I'd go and stand there and she would mark it and she'd go, Charlotte would never make that sort of error. Which again, like you think, oh my God. But in those days, they didn't think about the kind of things they said and the impact that. So I used to always get well tried stickers. but I was I was therefore kind of, I learned that I was stupid. And so at school, I didn't do terribly well. I got, I think, 5 O levels, but that was only, 2 years after my dad died. And then A levels, I got 2 Ds and an E. And again, my lovely, clever sister will always remind me that one of those was general studies, which doesn't really count. But in the scheme
So the
of things,
sisterly banter's alive and well then.
yeah, still is. But in the scheme of things, it just didn't seem that important. I was just trying to keep going. I was in the youth orchestra with my flute, so I was doing really well with that. I obviously, I'd stopped riding because we couldn't afford to keep the horse and all the rest of it. So, but I was just looking forward. I had no clue what I wanted to do. Found boyfriends. I was engaged when I was 17. To a guy. Actually, one of the other funny stories I'll tell you in terms of being stupid is that at one point I told my father that I wanted to go into the army, and then I said, yeah, and I want to be in the intelligence corps, and I think I said that not because I had any clue what the intelligence corps did, but because actually it created a laughter in the house, because how can stupid Hetty be in the intelligence corps? Anyway. And I do think that had he lived, there was a good chance I would have actually ended up going into the army. But I was engaged at 17 to a RAF squaddy, and we were going to get married very quickly, and I was going to live in married quarters. Honestly, it would have lasted about 2 minutes. And then when I was sort of 17 and a half, I met my now husband, actually, who is an actor, and he was just finishing his time at Lambda. And he came to our town, and I met him, and we've been together ever since.
Wow.
Which is, I think we do need the medals for that one.
That's a congratulations. Yeah.
So, but all of this time, what I'm doing is when I met Fidel and fell in love, at that point, my future was mapped out in terms of my relationship with him, because having lost my dad, there was no way I was going to let him go, right? I needed to know that I had that relationship behind me, and that core relationship behind me. I left home at 18, went to live with Fidel, went to Polytechnic. So I was going to do a bilingual secretarial course at Leeds Poly. And I changed my mind then, and I went to do a business studies higher national diploma, because that's all I could get in to do. But they told me when I started it that at the end of each year, they'll take, 3 or 4 students from the HND onto the degree. And so by that time, again, this determination in me and increasing belief in my ability was starting to flourish. And I thought, well, then I will be one of those 4 or 5 that get transferred from the HND to the business studies degree. And I was. And I think, so do I understand myself? I understand the experiences that I've been through as a child. I understand that I have got this innate drive in me in terms of, which is probably fueled by a desire, certainly in the first instance or for the first few years, of being appreciated. But the second thing that is driving, that fuels that drive, is running away. I spent the first 20 years of my life, my career, running away from the past, running away from trauma. And I used to get told at work over those times that, I was brilliant, I was focused, I was delivering, that was all brilliant. But there's a veil across it. People don't feel like they are getting to know the real me. And I didn't have a clue what they were. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know the real me? As far as I was concerned, that was the real me, because it was all I knew. But it wasn't the real me. It was a me with a mask.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. Very common. I think it's a real big trait amongst a lot of men as well, actually.
Yeah.
I think particularly where you've had any sort of traumatic experiences, we're rubbish as a part of the species at talking about this sort of stuff, and it's why obviously male suicide is such a problem and so on as well. Yeah. And I think it's good that it's getting a better airing, but it's still a really, really big challenge. So no, I can completely see that.
And I think that's why, particularly in men, as you say, when men very sadly do take their own life, you often hear, their friends and family say, I spoke to him the hour before and he was fine. This masking as a habit kind of really can get in the way of reaching out, of getting the help that you need, because you don't end up having the right
100%.
conversations.
I mean, a chap who was a very good friend of mine had actually replaced me in 2 of my senior Air Force jobs before I took over me when I was a squadron commander. He took over me again when I was in a Group Captain Typhoon at High Wycombe. And he died by suicide during my time as station commander at Coningsby. And I'd spoken to him the week before. I knew he wasn't quite right. I'd actually, I'd so much so that I'd taken him on side and said, "What's up? You're not you okay? Is there anything you want to talk about?" And he wouldn't be drawn on it at all. And it was just tragic. You think, God, I mean, married, kids, absolutely horrendous, really. And such a waste of a very, very talented individual who, I think with a bit of help could have probably got through that. It was tragic.
Yeah. And I think, and again, we'll probably come on to talk about it, but I think, death by suicide, in terms of those that are left behind is one of the toughest things to be able to come to terms with.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, interestingly, on a more cheery note, if you like, on the exams thing, not least, I mean, we're recording this the week after the A-level results came out in the UK and the week before the GCSE results come out. And I, like you, I mean, I went through school. I spent way too much time in the CCF and not enough time doing, studying. So I passed. I mean, I got 8 O-levels and 3 A-levels, but my grades at A-level, particularly for the university entrance that I had, and I had a sponsorship, Air Force sponsorship to go to university. Oh. They weren't there. And I wrote a post about this the other day, actually, or replying to someone else's post where I said, look, I just rang the Air Force up and said, hey, can I come in straight away instead of going to university? And the rest is kind of history. I went 34 and a half years later, left as an Air Vice Marshal and all the rest of it. And I do think it's one of these things that we have societally built ourselves into a place where we're putting a huge amount of pressure on children, particularly, and youngsters at university as well, to have high-level academic attainment, which I'm not knocking high-level academic attainment, but I don't think it's the be-all and end-all of life. And I don't think life ends if you don't achieve it. In fact, I know it doesn't. And I think it's really, really important that people kind of recognize that, yes, it might be a slight setback in terms of what you were hoping for and what you'd achieved and all the rest of it, but you've got to learn to deal with these kind of failures and setbacks in your life and move on through them. And if you do move on through them, there's no reason why you can't have an amazingly successful career. And, I think you and I are both singing off the same sheet on that.
Totally agree. In fact, I did a post as well this time around on exactly the same theme. There is something about my inner drive that I think means that I was resourceful. I was able to figure out a way to kind of get to something and doing something. I never had one great big plan, by the way. I think that's always sometimes a bit of a mistake. But, I was able to find my way through in what I would call a somewhat squiggly way. But actually having to find the resources to manage a squiggly pathway makes you much more of an asset to an organization. It means you're much more resourceful. You're much better able to see around the straight lines and not kind of be sort of floundered and stopped by the straight line not working. I think it's brilliant skill. And actually, in that respect, I think, we should seriously think about the pathway we're sending our kids on, which is, it's got to be straight line or no line.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you do see people who've never failed at anything in their life. And okay, I mean, great, well done them if they've achieved an amazing amount. But sooner or later they're going to, and it's going to be a mighty big shock. And I think I when I was a school governor at my old school at Christ Hospital at Horsham for 8 years, I finished a couple of years ago. And we used to have endless debates about some of this stuff where they were still quite good about competitive sport and things like that. But I do think the kind of progressive societal approach that, no, we don't want too much competition. People need to be, everyone's, needs to be feeling they're achieving and all the rest of it. And again, no, if you school as much as anything else and education as much as anything else is about life skills development as well as academic development. And I think if you're not careful, you're preparing people for completely the wrong thing in life, because life is competitive. Yep. It doesn't matter what you do, it's competitive. And I think that it's just really important people grasp that and actually get on and recognize that they've got to, got to be able to find a way through when it doesn't quite work out the way they thought it was going to.
Exactly. I agree.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, obviously, we've sort of started to segue into this a little bit, but the podcast is all about leadership. You have moved from a world of various different jobs that you've clearly been building up your skill set into being a CEO and a chair. So you're doing both those sort of top end roles. I'm just really interested in how you have developed your own leadership style, as it were, whether it's unconscious, whether it's conscious, how you've changed over time to be the leader that you are today.
Another profound question to which I will have to find a profound answer. So I am going to give quite a profound answer, which is the underbelly of my change, which is important to understand. And then I'll talk about sort of how I've taken that underbelly and used it to grow my leadership, if you like. So we've talked about the fact that for the first 20 years of my career, I was very much masking, driving forward, always succeeding, could never let anything get in my way in terms of doing the right thing and achieving what needed to be achieved, but masking. Being an okay leader, because at the end of the day, I'm not a monster and I'm not a sociopath, I don't think, but not amazing. And then in 2020, Halloween 2020, my close friend Joanna Simpson was brutally killed by her estranged husband, Robert Brown, who was a British Airways captain.
Although Hetty mentions that Joanna was killed in 2020, she was actually killed on the 31st of October 2010.
And it was horrific. It made more horrific as we started to learn more about what had happened. So it was a week before their final High Court hearing. So at the kind of really superficial level, it was just devastating because she was so nearly there in terms of being free. But he had other things on his mind, and he literally spent 3 to 6 months digging a deep grave in Windsor Grove Park with a makeshift coffin in it. He took a hammer in his daughter's homework bag to the house when he dropped the children off after half term, bludgeoned her to death, put her in the boot, put the children in the back of the car, dropped them off at his pregnant girlfriend's house, and went off into the night into Windsor Great Park to bury her. And we only found out sort of even that she was missing. That was the Sunday night. She went missing. We found out she was missing on the Monday when the children didn't turn up to school, and it took 5 days to find her. He was then subsequently convicted of manslaughter due to diminished responsibility, not murder, even though it was murder in every sense. So there was a deep, deep sense of injustice. So through that 6 months, the effect that had on me was that, frankly, I just fell apart. So that moment of trauma. Remember, I talked about the last 20 years and that I'd been running away from trauma that had never been addressed. And it was all about controlling, not looking back, just looking forward. And on the Monday, I was at work and I found out, and I went to Ascot, even though I was living in Bath at the time, because I just needed to be in Ascot, which is where it happened. And I went to her other friend, Belinda's. And we spent time together that afternoon, which all went round like a bit of a blur. But my husband then came to pick me up from Belinda's sort of early evening and drove me back to Bath. Got back to Bath about 11 o'clock at night. And I said, "Oh, I've got to go to bed. I've got to go to bed. I've got to go to work tomorrow." And he said, "No." He said, "Oh, have a brandy." I went, "I don't want a brandy. I've got to go to work." He said, "You don't have to go to work tomorrow." And I said, "Oh." And in that moment, the little voice in my head said, "You don't have to be in control anymore." And boy, was I not in control. So I did have a couple of brandies and I literally fell apart. And I think that's completely understandable in the circumstances.
Yeah.
But it was that moment in my brain that said, "No, you don't have to be in control anymore. You can give in to this." And I hadn't given in to anything in those 20 years.
How did you deal with it subsequently then?
So it took a long, long time. I think the combination of the deep trauma, the horror of what happened, which is impossible for the human brain to get your head around in terms of just the horror of what had happened and the fact that she stood no chance. And all that time I'd spent with her in the months before she was killed, he was digging her grave. I mean, that's just a really horrible sort of oxymoron to try and get your head around. And then the deep injustice when the jury said not guilty. I simply fell apart. There was no other words to use for it. I was in a deep state of very complex PTSD. I was heavily medicated. I wasn't working. I I was unable to really do anything other than the sort of basic homely things, but I would spend days on end in bed as well. I was just a wreck. I was an absolute wreck. And it was tough. It was tough for my family. It was particularly tough for my girls who were 13 and 9 at the time. And their mother, who'd been a really strong part, I'd been this strong mother for all those years. And then they just saw me falling apart. Everything just falls apart at the seams. But so I didn't work for about 3 years, which created a lot of financial implications, which had taken us about 15 years to crawl our way out of. But I was having therapy. I was having really hardcore trauma therapy, which in of itself is tough. You get worse before you get better. But I would always say to people at that time, my fire was gone. But what never went out was the pilot light. There was always a little pilot light flickering. And I used that pilot light and my passion and my anger to put my energy into starting to try to campaign for change. What was so wrong with what had happened with Joe is that he got away with murder. And that was so wrong on so every level. You always think when you're not involved in these things that the criminal justice system will support you as victims. Well, it's very offender centric. But B, how can someone who does that get convicted of manslaughter? I mean, what the hell, right? That doesn't compute. No one understood it. So I needed to understand it.
Was there ever an explanation to that? Because it does, I mean, you're right, on the face of it, that seems extraordinary.
Very briefly, there is no real explanation. The CPS said they thought it was just a rogue jury. Well, I think that's just lazy, frankly. At the heart of it lies the murder law, and our murder laws go back to the 1957 Homicide Act, which is when we still had capital punishment, and is fundamentally about saying that if you kill someone and you plan to do it, i.e. there is premeditation, then that is murder. But because they were concerned about hanging people who had severe mental illness, for example, they had this sort of get out jail clause, literally, and they have these partial defences, which are diminished responsibility, now called loss of control. And there is another one, which is insanity, which is true craziness. Okay. All of those result in a murder conviction not being a murder conviction, but becoming manslaughter. And therefore, and the reason why it's called manslaughter, not murder, is because at the time murder was a mandatory death sentence. Murder is still a mandatory, but it's a mandatory life sentence. So when they changed it from a death sentence to a life sentence, they kept that structure. So that structure is fine, but that structure can also be manipulated by clever people. And that was the case with Robert Brown. He was able to go through court and effectively charm the jury. If he'd been able to wear his British Airways captain's uniform, he would have done. It was very much a persona that he was putting across and putting himself up as being the victim, basically saying that Jo was the bitch from hell, that she had money, that she was holding money back from him. She was trying to cripple him financially in the divorce hearing, and that stress of the divorce is what drove him to do it. And unfortunately, the law if well interpreted and manipulated, the law provides the platform for that to happen. The defense barrister also said something which will etched in my brain forever, which might shock people, and was not disagreed with by the prosecution barrister or the judge. And the defense barrister said, if you have a mental illness, in the law they call it a medical condition, an abnormality of mind driven by a medical condition, And he was claiming adjustment disorder, which is basically what 90% of the population had after COVID, right? It's you're struggling to adjust to situations. It's not as bad as depression, for example. But if you have an abnormality of mental functioning driven by a recognized medical condition, and that medical condition, but there's a lot of evidence of planning. If that planning happened before the onset of the medical condition, then you have to disregard the planning, because you can never prove that without the medical condition, he would ever have carried out his plans.
The defense barrister said that.
The defense barrister said that. If you ever want a blueprint to murder, that's perfect. Okay, I'll dig a grave, a really deep grave that no one's ever going to find, by the way, right under the flight path, so that he's going to be able to keep an eye on it afterwards. A really deep grave. And then what I'll do is I'll say that after I dug that, I'll wait a little while, and then I'll get depression. And then if I do get found out, then I can just say, well, I was never going to do it. I was just acting out. But it's this mental condition that made me do it. There you go.
No, I can't imagine for the kids for a start on Joanna's side, but for you too. I mean, anyone close in that, and I know I've obviously seen you on an event previously with Joanna's mother as well, and I just admire you immensely for actually turning such a horrible situation, which was clearly ghastly and remains ghastly, into such a triumph in terms of what you've done. I mean, we've taken it on a level, really. Let's come back to the leadership thing in a minute, because I mean, where's the story go with the foundation and so on this? How did you turn it all around? Because you have done that. It's an amazing story.
Yes. So he was given by the way, what's driven me fundamentally at a fundamental level is two things through this particular subject. One is I categorically am driven by doing the right thing and for things to be right and just. And in my every single bone of my body, I knew that what had happened in the criminal justice system was not right or just. But he got 26 years sentence, which is unheard of in manslaughter, which just shows that the judge absolutely knew that he was guilty of murder. But because it was a determinate sentence, not a life sentence, he was entitled to be let out halfway through. Didn't have to go in front of the parole board. He was automatically released halfway through. And actually, I was going to say what's driven me, fundamentally the children, right? It felt so wrong that these two desperately young children who were 9 and 10 at the time, who'd been made to travel in the car with their dead mother, who were living in peace, relative peace, and learning to live again under the care of their amazing grandmother, Diana Parks, would too soon have to face the release of their father from prison that they were terrified of. So when the time started to get near, he was due to be released in November 2023. I mean, it took over my life for some time. When I was in that really deep trauma, I just could not, the thought of my life carrying on after November 23 seemed impossible. I remember I got a passport that was going to run out in 2023, and it was like, God, that's going to be then. It's like it's been this shadow that's hung over my life. But as we started to get closer to it, we sort of, in a long, convoluted way, we ended up having a sensible conversation with probation, the victim support team at probation, and we're talking about, this was a couple of years beforehand, we're talking about, what's going to happen when he gets released, how are you going to protect us? And what came out of that conversation was them basically saying, well, he is a critical public protection case, is what they said. A critical public protection case basically means that he is going to need very careful monitoring in the public because he is a danger. So we're like, okay, so we've always thought he's a danger, but you're now telling us he actually is a danger. So why are you releasing him? Well, we have to release him. Okay. So we literally felt like sitting ducks, put to one side the issue around the wider public because he's going to be a danger to any woman that he builds a relationship with. So I'm like, this is just wrong on every level. This is wrong. Come back to my, things have to be right. So I'm quite resourceful and have become quite resourceful over the years in finding out information, in making connections, in getting advice. And I went to my dearest friend Google. AI wasn't around at the time. It was quite funny. I went to my dearest friend Google and I asked Google whether there is basically any way to stop someone on a determinate sentence from being automatically released. And it brought up this new clause that had been passed in the 2022 Crime Policing Sentencing Act, or I might have those words wrong around, but fundamentally. And it said, at a basic level, lots of kind of legal gobbledygook, but fundamentally it was saying if someone is dangerous and they're on a determinate sentence, you can use this section 132 to stop them from coming out of prison, or more to the point, the Secretary of State for Justice has the power to do that. And I thought, bingo, got it. So I contacted Robert Buckland, the wonderful Robert Buckland, who actually, ironically, by that time was my MP. I've sworn to him that I did not stalk him because I'd only just moved into the house. Again, it's that serendipity thing, right? So I contacted Robert and I said, I think I've got the answer. The answer is section 132. And I also contacted a friend of mine who's now a high court judge, actually. And I said, I've got the answer. There's an answer to section 132. And they both came back to me and said, really tenuous. Like, this was not put in place for this kind of scenario. I'm afraid you're absolutely off track on this. And indeed, the probation officer that we were talking to said exactly the same thing. So the system was telling me no. But again, I don't care what the legal detail says, which basically said it's designed for people who go into prison for an index crime that is relatively sort of, what's the word? But like not a serious crime, but they then become radicalized in prison. It was a way to try to stop people that have been radicalized in prison and become more dangerous in prison from being let out automatically. But that's detail. Fundamentally, this man's dangerous, and there's a section there that can stop him from coming out. And I then met Carrie Simmons, Carrie Johnson, at a event at the Palace, which I'd been invited to alongside Joe's mother and indeed the children to mark the 16 days of activism against violence against women and girls. Again, going back to that link with the Duchess of Cornwall that we then had. And I went up to Carrie just because I like talking to people, and partly because I'm the chair of Refuge. So I thought, Carrie could be quite interesting in terms of whether she might be interested in coming and getting involved in Refuge. And she was the wife of the Prime Minister at the time.
Which is handy.
Which is sort of handy. And and I said, hello, and I introduced her to Diana. And she was very alarmed to hear the story of what had happened, and critically alarmed. And I would say overly alarmed in some respect about the fact this guy was going to come out of prison. And she said, I want to help you. And I'm thinking, yeah. I know he has to come out of prison. I don't know what you're going to do, Carrie, because the law says he has to be released. But I then spoke to Carrie a couple of weeks later, and I didn't realise and had forgotten that she was one of the victims of War Boys, the London taxi driver rapist.
I didn't know that. Yeah, interesting.
And indeed, I don't think she was raped by him, I think, but he did sedate her. So he didn't kind of quite, thankfully, she wasn't a kind of victim in terms of being a victim of rape, but she was nonetheless a victim. And she had successfully campaigned to get the judicial review into the parole board decision to release War Boys, which stopped War Boys from coming out of prison. And actually, ironically, his next parole hearing is coming up as we speak. So that's what motivated her to want to help us. She really believed that she could help us. And so I guess that's what happened, which was the catalyst to us then launching a campaign called #NotAnotherJoe, which was something I kind of came up with when I was walking the dogs at one point. And it was fundamentally about making a heck of a lot of noise to say, this man is dangerous, and we need to urge the Secretary of State to look at this case very carefully and stop his automatic release. And when we started the campaign on the 1st of March, we had the support of Robert Buckland, we had the support of Priti Patel, who was the we had an ex-Home Secretary, we had the ex-Lord Chancellor, and of course Jess Phillips was an incredible supporter, as well as increasingly many others. But God blimey, when I was told, okay, we're going to do this event in Westminster, we're going to invite these people, we're going to invite the media, I had no idea what I was letting myself in for. And so we do this event, we talk, the media talk to us, but we've got Carrie behind us, okay? We're not just talking about one little article in, I don't know, the Daily Mail in the middle pages, right? Before we know it, we're on the front page of the Daily Mail, we're on the front page of the Sun. We're being invited to Good Morning Britain, to BBC Breakfast, blah, blah. It's like relentless. And that was quite scary. It was like, oh my God, look what we started. And I'm trying to be a CEO of a business and the chair of the chair of a charity and do all of this stuff in the background. Well, you can't do, you don't get away with having it in the background and nobody noticing, because that's quite the point, the opposite. But we did it. That's the most important thing. We first of all lobbied the then Lord Chancellor Dominic Raab. Dominic Raab then moved on, and we then had to start again with Alex Chalk. And in October 2023, Alex Chalk invited me to his offices. We had Joe's mother and brother and the children on Teams, and the Lord Chancellor, Alex Chalk, said, I'm not going to beat about the bush. I have decided, actually can't really say this without crying. I have decided to stop his automatic release, use my powers. And the prisoner was notified an hour ago. And it was when he said the prisoner was notified an hour ago that really got to me. But that was such a moment.
Oh, I can imagine. I mean, and well done you for, believing and continuing the charge, and obviously with some support, and fantastic that you got the support. And it is amazing, isn't it, how often these things, if you get the wind in your sails from somewhere, and get the media behind you in a big way, and then the kind of political, stuff swings behind you as well, how that can make a difference. I mean, I can see how much it means to you, obviously. I mean, it would be emotional to be in that position. And I mean, I know there's a postscript to this. I mean, Pride of Britain Award winner. I remember watching you on the TV when that was happening. I was like, that's Hetti. It's incredible. And and obviously a CBE and all that goes with that. And what's the outcome for Robert Brown?
So where are we now? August 2025. Listen to that. He's still in prison. He did do a judicial review against that decision, but like forever, we've got a lot to thank Alex Chalk for, because he was very, very diligent in the review that he did of the case, because he knew that Robert Brown would take it to judicial review, and he needed to be able to demonstrate that he had independently made the decision, because the argument from Robert Brown would be, and indeed it was, that the Lord Chancellor was fundamentally acting on public pressure, and that there was no real grounds for the decision. But Alex was brilliant and very, very diligent in making sure that the grounds for which he stopped his automatic release were founded. And boy, were they founded, because we discovered that he had spent basically 13 years in prison, victim blaming, never acknowledging that he'd done anything wrong, and expressing significant grievance against Joe's family and friends, and in particular myself and Joe's mother. So he's a very dangerous man. He's just getting more and more angry the longer he's in there. But yeah, he's still in prison. We have now found out that his parole hearing will be in January. We asked for it to be a public parole hearing, but we were told that it violated his Article 8 rights, which is basically his European Court of Human Rights, human law rights. And we've got the parole hearing in January, which they have agreed that we can observe. I will be very disappointed if he is released. in part because one of the things you have to do to be released is to demonstrate that you've shown remorse and to demonstrate that you have done the programs of rehabilitation. Now, as at 2024, he had not shown any remorse and he had not done any programs because he didn't believe he needed to, because he believed he was going to be automatically released. So if he's now magically pulled all that out of the hat, then I would hope that the judge will see through that and understand that that is nothing more than his narcissism focusing on what's good for him, rather than genuine remorse.
Well, I wish you luck. I mean, I really do. I think it's a phenomenal campaign that you've run, and I think the good thing as well is it having had so much very obvious airtime, literally. That is going to make a difference if it does come back up again, because it'll bubble back up into the public psyche very quickly. And I think that the whole topic, as you mentioned, the fact there is now a term of violence against women and girls, etc., and it's lots of people campaigning in this sort of space to do lots of really good work. I think that you have, I would hope, the best possible chance of getting the right kind of outcome, because that's certainly what needs to happen is an outrage.
I hope so. And actually, one of the things that we've had news on in the last month, because we are determined to get substantive change to the system, right? And one of the things that we've heard about in the last month is that when someone gets released on license for a serious crime, they're still serving their sentence, but it's out in the community.
Yeah.
And the way the system works at the moment is that there is an exclusion zone that's created around where the victims live to stop the perpetrator from coming near the victim. But 9 times out of 10, that exclusion zone is 1, 2, 3 miles. We're not talking a huge area. So what that does is it pinpoints where the victim is, but also it traps the victim in that exclusion zone because they feel fearful that if they go outside of the exclusion zone, they might bump into the perpetrator anywhere. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the Lord Chancellor has announced in the last 2 or 3 weeks that the sentencing bill, which will get its first reading in the autumn, is now going to include a change. And that change is that for more dangerous offenders who are let out on license, including lifers, by the way, they will have a restriction zone rather than an exclusion zone. So that means that they will be restricted the offender will be restricted on where they can go. And that then, avoids you pinpointing where the victim is, but more importantly, probably giving the victim the freedom to actually go where they need to go and want to go. It's the game changer. It's absolute game changer for victims.
No, it's huge, and quite rightly. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're coming out on license for some major crime, murder, etc., then absolutely that's the right way it should be. It shouldn't be on the victims. I totally agree. Exactly. I think that's good.
And it was the brainchild of Joe's mother, Diana Parks. She just she kept saying, "Who's going to monitor Robert Brown? Who's going to monitor Robert Brown?" And then she said one day, should be the other way around. It's just all completely wrong. It's all against the victim and all for the offender. The offender should be trapped in an area. And in fact, Joshua Rosenberg has referred to it as prisons without walls. And that is it. Put them in a prison in terms of an area. Don't put the victim in a prison.
No, too right. Wow. God, what a story. I mean, I can't begin to imagine really how you've had to deal with that, and obviously the family, and must hugely appreciate your support as well in terms of driving it forward. But particularly, as you said a second ago, you're the CEO of a company, you're the chair of a charity, so there's quite a juggling act going on there, Hetti. And we started off this conversation about your adaptation of your leadership style. Let's loop back to that. I mean, how have you actually managed to balance that? I mean, you mentioned obviously you went off the rails for a bit and it was all very difficult. How did you get yourself back? And because that's an incredible success story. I mean, you are now doing all those things and you've had all the success with the campaign and so on as well. So, I really applaud you for that. But how
on earth did I do it?
How did you do it?
So, one of the things I haven't shared is that I was not working for 3 or 4 years, and then I literally crawled back to do some work for Capita, actually, on their bid for the smart meters project. But that was because a friend of mine, wonderful Jonathan Simcock, who again I'd met through Windsor Leadership, was running the DCC at the time, and he knew me. And frankly, he didn't need me in for what was 1 or 2 days a week. He didn't need me. He could have done it without me. But he could see I desperately needed someone to give me a leg up. And I remember he offered me, I went to the meeting with him and another lovely lady, Lisa Jeffries, and they agreed that they would pay me £500 a day. Now, in my previous life, if someone said £500 a day, I would tell them where to stuff it. But I cried at the prospect that someone would actually think I was worth £500 a day. I felt utterly worthless. But I did. I crawled back. I then went from there to Vodafone, where again, Phil Mottram did me a favour and brought me in. I was still really jittery. Slowly, I started to find some mojo. But through all of that time, I was still fundamentally deeply traumatized. So I was very much on survival mode. We were struggling with money because of all that time not working. So our finances were all over the place. I was still on medication. I was just surviving. And then I got diagnosed with breast cancer.
It never rains. Oh, dear. Unreal.
But I actually believe fundamentally that was due to all of the trauma. You know, they say the body keeps a score. And, you know, there's a lot of research now to suggest that a lot of cancers are brought on by stress and trauma. And effectively, your body goes into inflammation and that then triggers cancer responses. So I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I took a year out where I had something like 5 operations, chemotherapy, lost all my hair. But during that time, I met an incredible psychiatrist that the hospital put me in touch with. There's a guy called Dr. Gordon Turnbull. You may have heard of Gordon, Bob, being RAF, but he was the sort of RAF chief psychiatrist. And he was the guy that wrote books on trauma. And indeed, he was the guy that worked with a lot of the people involved in Lockerbie and helping them to deal with the trauma, because the issue with Lockerbie was that anyone involved, you know, it was not about saving lives. It was about, you know, picking up bodies, right? And that's a really tough thing to deal with.
Yeah.
Pieces of. But he's not practicing anymore because he's retired, but he was brilliant, is all I would say. And I think the combination of Professor Turnbull and the sort of support he gave me and the chemotherapy meant that I came out of that phase having been cured, as much as you ever are cured, of PTSD. I literally woke up one morning, and this is no word of a lie, I woke up one morning and my feet were on the ground.
Wow.
I just couldn't believe it. I suddenly felt like, oh my God, I'm back. The chemotherapy, when you have chemotherapy, certainly for breast cancer, it basically fries everything, and it fried my brain. And when you're living in a state of trauma, your brain is on constant high alert. It's exhausting. It's utterly exhausting. And I think, I've got no science basis on which to say this, but I think having the chemo, which fried my brain and took it to about 20% capacity, broke the habit of that high anxiety, because I just didn't, you know, it was just boom, it was dead. That's my theory. But the good thing is I came out of that having been cured of cancer, cured of PTSD, and wanting to live my life, because I realized I'd spent the last 10 years of my life at a fundamental level not living and not really caring whether I lived or not, or didn't. And then I sort of came out of all of that where I had faced my own mortality and thought, it's awful what happened to Joe and the trauma's been awful, but actually, I don't know how much longer I've got left. And I'm damned if I'm going to spend the rest of my time on this planet trapped in this space of not wanting to let go of the past and trapped in this space of not living. And that's really what pivoted me into where I am now, which means that coming back to the question of leadership, I'm really actually quite proud of my leadership. I mean, no one's a perfect leader. And I think the day you think you're a perfect leader, you're failing. Right?
Time to stop. Yeah.
It's definitely time to stop. But what I am is I'm me. I'm massively authentic. what I care about is people first and foremost, and that authenticity and the fact that I deeply care and that I've stopped this running away from things. And therefore, whilst I still have passion, I do still have drive, I execute it in a way in which I know that at the end of the day, it's all about the people, stupid. And that all of the people that work with me will say that that authenticity really shines through and has enabled me to create the kind of culture that I'm super proud of in Ploughshare, where we can have the honest conversations, where somebody can, turn up at work looking really crap and not feel like someone's going to judge them. And that's, I guess, typifies my leadership. And, people are constantly saying to me, where do you find the time to do any of this stuff? And, this week's been typical, right? This week, because I also, by the way, support other families and support other survivors who want my help in helping them to, navigate difficult things.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that at all, actually. I think the fact that you've been obviously so successful and so dedicated to it is going to slightly magnetic effect to other people who say, oh, me too.
Yeah. So, this week is typical. I've probably done 3 hours on calls with Refuge, and usually outside of the working day, but not always. I have worked lots of hours for Ploughshare because I'm actually driving towards launching effectively a campaign with Ploughshare, which is going to be really fun. And I've also spent 1 hour on the phone and numerous texts with a family whose daughter was killed last year, whose killer her boyfriend has managed to get the CPS to agree to a plea of diminished responsibility, which is another gross miscarriage of justice. And he will be sentenced on Friday. So helping them to think through and navigate through what's going to happen on Friday, but making sure there's loads of media there so that the story actually gets picked up and there's a public conversation about it. I've been doing that. And I've also spent the hour on the phone with a survivor of rape with the police around her case, which seems to be going nowhere fast. But I make that stuff work and I fit it in because I do what matters.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's not been my typical podcast, this, because we've spent quite a bit of time on a really important topic, and I just absolutely applaud you for all of that. I do tend to ask people about highs and lows. I'm kind of guessing there might be.
You've had quite a few of those.
I could probably have a bit of a prediction, but if you had to pick one thing, what is your kind of high point of your whole career?
One. My whole career or my whole life?
You can have whole life if you like.
Can I have both?
Yeah, you can. Go on.
So Ploughshare is definitely the high point of my career. And the reason for that is because of everything that we discussed. It brings together my passion for making a difference in society every single day, together with my professional skills and being able to create that culture and that environment that I can be proud of. That's why I love Ploughshare. And I also love Ploughshare because I would say for the last 15 years of my career in industry, I wasn't really learning anything new. What I was doing was applying what I'd learned in those times at BA and partly in Centrica and applying them to a different environment, which meant I wasn't genuinely getting that much out of it. Whereas every day's a school day at Ploughshare. So I'd say Ploughshare is definitely a highlight of my career so far, but there's more to come. Who knows what's going to come? And in terms of the highlight of my life, there's so many highlights. I'd say the highlight out of the low light was the moment I mentioned in terms of that moment when Alex Chalk told us that Robert Brown was staying in prison. Because it was such a game changer and affected so many lives at such a profound level and actually lays the ground for other decisions like that to be made as well.
Yeah, and not only a success in terms of the actual the physical result. I mean, he stays in prison, he's less not a threat, and so on and so forth. But also actually massive vindication for the campaign you ran and the work you put in. And I can totally see that.
Yeah,
hugely must have been massively satisfying.
Yeah, and but then of course probably the real highlight of my life is my children who are two girls who are 27 and 23 at the moment. They've done really well in their careers, but they've been through huge trauma as well. And no, their mother wasn't killed, but and so you can't you can't begin to describe the trauma that those children have gone through and continue to go through. But, my kids lived it. And so I'm super proud of the human beings that they've become. So I'd bring that out as a highlight as well.
Yeah, and hopefully there isn't a clever one and a stupid one. Of the two of them.
Very good question. There is not a clever one and a stupid one, but there are two who are very different, and could have, it could have gone down the line of clever and stupid, but they're just two different kids.
Yeah, it's amazing how that works out, isn't it? I don't have brothers and sisters, but my wife does, and I think it's fascinating to see same genes, different characters. Yeah. It's quite extraordinary, really.
Yeah.
Sadly, though, for every high point, there's obviously a low point. What's the low point, and what did you learn from it?
It might not be the sort of typical low point that you get on these podcasts from a career point of view, but actually my low point was after I came back to Vodafone, after I had been treated for breast cancer. By that time, as usually happens, and I come back to, what do companies do when people have a bad time? As usually happens, they reorganize so that your job isn't there anymore. And they didn't know what to do with me. And so what they did was they put me into a program, a digital transformation program, because they needed warm bodies in the digital transformation program. But it felt very much like, I was surplus to requirements in said program. And I literally found myself filling in spreadsheets, literally just filling in spreadsheets, not using my brain at all. And remember, at this point, I'd turned that corner, right? My spark had started to come back. And what was I doing? Filling in spreadsheets. And worse still, although I do have respect for him, and I have respect for everybody I work with, I was about to hesitate then, and now I do. He was an ex-teacher, so he couldn't help himself. I'd go to him and sort of show him what I'd done with this spreadsheet, and he'd point out that I didn't have a full stop at the end of a sentence, or really kind of, and for me, I am not a detail, but I am not a detail person at the best of times. But that was just like, seriously, guys, is this really what you want me to do? And so that was definitely a low point in my career. And I share it for two reasons. One, because actually, that's pretty rubbish. And how good are organizations? How good is your organization, not you, Bob, but your in its broader sense, at properly understanding that people who go through difficult times, if you support them properly, actually will come out stronger. They will actually come out with more resolve, more resilience for sure. And yes, they might need your support in the early days so that they don't crash and burn, but give them the space to be able to be brilliant again, because that's what's going to get them back. Don't try to put them in a box because they're too, you don't know what to do with them. It's the worst thing you can do to a human being. And how often do we do it? But the second thing is, look across these large companies. Look at what I'm doing now. 5 years later, look at what I'm achieving. How many people in these large companies are sitting filling in spreadsheets because the organization has failed to see the brilliance in them and failed to nurture them to be able to show that brilliance and be the very best they can be? I'd say there is quite a lot.
Oh, yeah. No, I totally agree with you. I mean, interesting, a couple of points you've made there that I think are really interesting. One, I did a podcast with John Peters, who, Gulf War I prisoner of war, and spent rather longer than he wanted to as a guest in Saddam Hussein's facilities, which was horrific. I mean, the story is, I haven't had many podcasts where I put out trigger warnings, but that's one. I mean, it's an absolutely awful account. But he said, yeah, but a lot of people talk about post-traumatic stress, but there's also post-traumatic growth. And you can actually, to your point, really, you can really build on this. And he has definitely done that. I mean, he's, in terms of what he's doing and how successful he's become as a result of everything from that, which I think is is testament to him for sure. Absolutely. And I think that's that is great. And I think to your point about people sitting there in jobs or doing things where actually they're being underutilized. Often when I do training, actually, I talk to people about who has favorites in their team. And, people stick their hand up. And I say, if you haven't got your hand up, I'm not sure I entirely believe you, because it's kind of human nature. But the point I make is what happens to the people that aren't favourites and or the ones that are favourites? And clearly the risk is you're going to burn out the favourites and you're going to disenfranchise the non-favourites, who will end up ultimately probably leaving the organisation.
Yeah.
And some of them may be not lost causes, but they may not be suited to that particular world or whatever and need to do something different. But plenty of them are not. And they can actually absolutely be utilised in a better way if they're given the opportunities to do so. So no, I'm very, very much with you.
Exactly. I also think there's more trauma around in society than we think, right? It's going to be the next big thing for the next 20 years, I really believe. And when you are in a state of trauma, your default is to make your world smaller to stay safe. And so actually, how many of those people who are not raising their head above the parapet actually just need the permission to do so and need the nurturing and the support to do so, because actually they're living with trauma that means that, they're frightened to do so.
No, I think that's very fair. I wouldn't disagree with that for 1 second. You've been very generous with your time. There's 2 or 3 quick things I'd like to cover, though. I mean, because I can't resist this. What was it like to be on the stage on the Pride of Britain Awards and win? I mean, it must have been amazing, wasn't it?
Yes. So, spoiler alert: you do actually find out that you've won before you get to the stage, because they have to do all the pre sort of videoing and recording and everything else. So, I got a phone call in the August, about this time last year, actually, literally. And I got a phone call. I'm driving along, and this woman says, "I'm from Pride of Britain, and I need to tell you that you've won an award." And I nearly crashed the car. I was so shocked.
You should have said you're driving the car. You need to stop.
And I thought it was a spoof. I mean, it was just like, kind of, seriously, is this serious? Look, it was such a privilege. It was amazing. Joe's mother was incredible. It was very emotional because of why we were there.
Really?
But yeah, it was. I mean, God, it was amazing. It was a once in a lifetime experience, and we found out that we won a cruise as well, which I'm now the whole family is going on a free cruise to the Caribbean in November, thanks to Pride of Britain. So that's really cool too. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And it's really inspired me, actually, to, I don't know if you have, Bob. I think the nominations for Pride of Britain are over for this year. But, I would encourage anybody to nominate people for Pride of Britain, right? Because if people are doing incredible things, they are exposing themselves. They're taking themselves out of their comfort zone. And whether that's somebody who saves somebody in some miraculous way, or whether it's somebody who campaigns, or whether it's somebody who, has changed the law, all sorts of different things. Different people end up on Pride of Britain, but there's a consistent thing about them, which is that they've taken themselves out of their comfort zone and they have done the extraordinary. And we should be better at recognising these people. They deserve it so much.
No, totally so. Yeah, that's a great point. I'd enjoy your cruise when you get to it as well. That'll be fabulous.
Can't wait. Haven't had a holiday for years.
So two that I always ask, one of which you may already have answered this, because what's the most memorable event of your career?
I'm going to ask you the same question, Bob. Career or life?
Career this time.
Okay, career. Because I have had quite a lot of fun in my career. What's the most memorable event? Actually, I'm going to give you a really random memorable event, but it has sort of stuck with me. When I was became the financial controller for catering, this is worldwide catering, budget of about £300 million. I was about 27, right? So I was way young, okay? I'm managing a team of 30 and on the catering leadership team. And the lady who was running catering at the time was a lady called Jenny Sharp, who was very regal. And I went on as a sort of young, bubbly, sort of 27-year-old onto the leadership team. Thought, I'm a leader. I've got to be a leader. And I did all of the wrong things. I acted like an arsehole. I felt like I had to fill every single gap in the conversation. And after about 2 or 3 weeks, Jenny pulled me to one side in her very regal way into her office. And she said, I want to have a chat, Hetti. I was like, oh, God. And she just basically said, look, in my view, one of the most important attributes of a great leader and great leadership is humility. You've done brilliantly to get to where you are. but be humble about it. And don't feel like you have to fill in every silence. You've proved yourself by being here. You don't need to be proving yourself in what you're doing and how you're saying. Just be you, be the great leader, and be humble. And I think those were great words that have lived with me all the way through my career. So actually, whilst I could think of all sorts of really great, amazing things that we've done, it's the things that hold in your memory and affect what you do day in, day out that matter. And for me, that's it.
Oh, that's a great story. I love that. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, humility is a hugely important thing, isn't it? If you're going to be a successful leader, I think, and it's very easy to not have it at all or lose it. On the way, and you do definitely see that. So, very last question then is again the one that I always ask, which is, what's the most difficult question you've ever been asked?
Apart from about 5 of the ones that you've asked me today, Bob.
I've got to give you a few challenges, I think.
The most difficult question that I've ever been asked. I would say I have done a little bit of thinking about this. You'd be pleased to hear. And there's one funny one, and there's one serious one. So the funny one is, will you marry me? I mean, that's quite a life-defining moment, isn't it? I mean, it's not the easiest of decisions. I mean, it should be really easy, and of course it is really easy, but it is going to dictate the rest of your life, so you've got to get it right.
So when that happened, were you not expecting it then?
No.
All right. Okay.
And it happened twice, don't forget.
Well, that's true. Yeah, okay.
But I think that the most difficult question I've probably ever been asked, which was in 2007, before any of the more difficult stuff started, when I was running away from my past, when I was masking big time, was when somebody asked me, and it was the first time in my career I'd been asked, weirdly, it was on a leadership development course. Someone asked me, what is it about your life that has defined you? And it was the very first time in what by that time was 25 years that I had been forced to hit my head against that wall that was my father passing away at 14. And it just started to remove that very deep scar that I had hidden away for 25 years.
And did you recognize that at the time, out of interest, or was that something that only later, when you thought about it, that that's the outcome?
It was. I did recognize it at the time as that was a moment that had kind of defined me, but I didn't understand how it had defined me. But it was the very first thing that came to mind when I was asked the question. So it was clearly always there, but I was just masking it and not prepared to face it.
Yeah, brilliant. Oh, Hetti, we could definitely. I mean, there's lots of things I would love to have asked, and we could probably have a part 2 at some point to this, because it's terrific. I'm very, very grateful for your time. I think I hugely admire what you've achieved and continue to achieve, particularly in the sort of the more charitable side of your work with the Joanna Simpson Foundation and with Refuge. I think that's incredible. And maybe another day we'll talk more about Ploughshare as well. But thank you ever so much. Really, really appreciate your time.
Bob, I'd say one thing. Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, of course you can.
Which is this. And I would like to leave it as something for people to think about, but it's because it is something I now would say I live my life by, which is, number one, we are only human. We are all human beings trying to do our best to navigate our way through life. So just be kind to each other. And the second thing is that if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. And don't wait around for someone else to do something about it. That was at the heart of what I did with the work that I did around the campaign. It's also at the heart of something I've done recently with Ploughshare, where they're talking about the classification of Ploughshare. So should we be a non-departmental public body or should we not? Now, there's a load of stuff around that debate that just did not feel right. And so I went into bat, and, that conversation's ongoing, so we'll see where it ends up. But if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. And just do something about it. Don't wait for someone else.
No, well, again, it's a great point to end on. I think there's a quote out there that gets used an awful lot, not least by me, actually, which is the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And that's exactly kind of what you're saying. And I think in the leadership role, that's critical. Because, if you walk past it, you're going to be perceived as accepting it by people that see you, work for you, and all around you. But no, once again, though, Hetti, thanks ever so much. Brilliant. Loved it.
No, thank you so much, Bob. Lovely to chat. Take care.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I really hope you've enjoyed this amazing episode with Hetti. As I said at the beginning, there are a few that I've done, if any, that are more powerful than this in terms of what she had to say. And I think it is, you can see the raw emotion when you watch the episode in her about some of the things that this has meant to her and along the way. If it's been valuable to you, then please share it. Please push it out there so other people get to see it, other people get to benefit from her incredible experience. And so sharing it, liking it, reposting it, doing all those kind of things, providing comments, providing feedback, anything like that really helps to boost the podcast and get more people paying attention to some of this stuff that I think is really, really important and really relevant to get to know. If you find it really valuable, then please think about going to Patreon and providing some financial support to the show, either by going through the support the show link in your podcast platform or going directly to the Patreon site, www.patreon.com/leadingforlife. And then you'll actually find my site there. You'll be able to join as a supporter, a champion, or a patron of the show. And for a very, very modest contribution, you'll be able to make a really, really very big contribution to continuing the podcast and making sure that I can continue to do what we do with this. So that will be hugely helpful and much appreciated if you're up for that. But as I always say, I'm really pleased to have you here as a listener or a viewer anyway. So thanks very much indeed, and see you very soon. Bye now.